In the kingdom of Varathia, bloodlines were sacred. The people believed that a ruler's worth wasn't just defined by strength or wisdom, but by the heirs they could produce. The royal family had long been celebrated for their unrivaled power. But in the eyes of the kingdom, their true value was seen in their ability to pass on their legacy. Without an heir, the future of the kingdom would be uncertain. No one could afford such a weakness. Leona had always been aware of her status. She was born into a noble family with wealth and influence, but for all the luxuries she had enjoyed, there was a constant shadow hanging over her. Her parents, particularly her mother, had always reminded her of her purpose in life, to marry well, bear children, and strengthen the family name. It was something that had been drilled into her since childhood. However, unlike her older siblings, Leona was different. She had never been able to conceive. She had always felt something was off, though the truth didn't come to light until her late teens. The doctors confirmed what her mother had feared. Leona was infertile. The news was devastating to her parents. They had invested years of planning and resources, all for the sake of continuing their noble bloodline. Infertility wasn't just a personal disappointment, it was a blow to their family's future. Their name would cease to carry the weight it once had. Their wealth would mean nothing without heirs to inherit it, at first. Her parents tried to shield her from the harsh reality. They suggested remedies, treatments, herbs, and healers from distant lands, but nothing worked. Leona's condition remained unchanged. The tension in the household grew as her mother became increasingly distant, her father more irritable. No one said it out loud, but Leona could feel it. Her parents saw her as a burden now, a constant reminder of their family's failure. The breaking point came when Leona was just 21. Her father, in a rare moment of silence, called her to his study. He sat at his desk, eyes averted, and motioned for her to take a seat. Her heart raced in her chest. She knew something was wrong. "Leona," he began, his voice stiff and cold, "we have to think about the future of this family. You've disappointed us, not because of who you are, but because of what you cannot give us." Her stomach twisted in knots. She could hear her mother's faint sobs from the hallway, but her father's voice grew louder. "You are a noble woman. You should be proud of that. But you are also a commodity in this world. Your inability to bear children means your value is diminished." Leona's throat closed as she struggled to breathe. She had never heard her father speak to her like this. It felt like a blow to the very core of her being. "I have arranged for you to be married to someone who doesn't care about your condition," her father continued, his eyes never meeting hers. "The Alpha King has agreed to take you in. He's looking for a woman who can bear him an heir, and while you cannot do that, perhaps your position can still be useful in his court." Leona's mind went blank. The Alpha King. He was a figure of myth, a man whose name carried the weight of legends. His kingdom was vast, and his power seemed to be unmatched. But he was also known for being ruthless. Many whispered that he was cold and indifferent, seeing only usefulness in people. It was said that the Alpha King had no interest in love, only in preserving his bloodline. To think that her parents had made such a decision without even consulting her was beyond her comprehension. "You will go to him, Leona, and you will obey him," her father said, as if that settled everything. Her mother's sobs grew louder, but still her father refused to meet her gaze. Leona stood there, her heart breaking. Her parents, the people who were supposed to protect her, made her nothing more than a pawn in their game of survival. In the days that followed, Leona's fate was sealed. She was given a simple gown, her belongings packed into a small satchel, and she was escorted to the royal palace. The journey was long, and the roads were harsh. But what truly weighed on her was the crushing realization that she was being sold. Her future was no longer her own. She was nothing more than an asset, a piece of property to be exchanged. When they arrived at the Grand Palace, Leona was led through towering gates and opulent halls. She barely registered the grandeur around her. The servants who passed her seemed to look at her with a mixture of pity and indifference, their eyes quickly averting from her gaze. Finally, she was brought before the Alpha King himself. His throne room was as intimidating as the man who sat upon the throne. The Alpha King was a towering figure, dressed in regal armor, his gaze as sharp as the blade at his side. He exuded an aura of power and control that made her knees shake with fear. But as he looked down at her, there was something else in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. The room fell silent, and Leona's heart thudded in her chest. The king rose from his throne, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. He approached her, his presence overwhelming. "You are the daughter of Lord Darius?" he asked, his voice deep and commanding. "Yes, your majesty," she replied. Struggling to keep her voice steady, he stared at her for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. Leona felt small under his scrutiny, as if he could see right through her. His lips curled into a slight smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Tell me, Lady Leona," the Alpha King said, his voice softer now, though still firm. "Do you know why you are here?" She swallowed hard. I believe I am here because I was sold to you by my parents." The king's expression remained unreadable. "And do you accept your fate?" Leona didn't answer immediately. Her heart ached with the weight of her words. How could she accept such a fate? But she had no choice. Her parents had made the decision for her, and now she was bound to it. "I accept, your majesty," she said quietly. The Alpha King nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. "Very well, Lady Leona. You will stay here at my palace, where you will fulfill the role your parents have arranged for you. But know this, I do not expect you to be a mere pawn in my game. You will be treated with respect, as long as you remember your place." Leona's stomach churned. Respect? He was offering her nothing but a gilded cage. Still, she said nothing. What could she say? The king turned his back on her, signaling the end of their meeting. "You will be shown to your quarters. Rest, Lady Leona. Tomorrow, we will begin preparations for your new life." Leona stood there, frozen, as the doors to the throne room closed behind her. She was alone, completely and utterly alone, as she was escorted to her chambers. Leona couldn't help but wonder how had everything gone so wrong. She had always known that her family valued bloodlines above all else, but never had she imagined that she would become a mere tool in their pursuit of status. Her worth, it seemed, had been determined not by who she was, but by what she could not give. But even as she lay in her cold, unfamiliar bed that night, something inside her refused to give up. She would not let her life be dictated by others. She had to find a way to take control of her own destiny. The Alpha King might have chosen her, but Leona knew this. She would choose herself. Leona's first few days in the royal palace were nothing like she had expected. The grandeur of the place, the opulence of the tapestries and gold-lined halls was overwhelming. Every servant, every official, and every noble she met seemed to look at her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. She was a noblewoman, yes, but she had been brought here not as a future queen, but as an unwilling guest, a pawn in a royal game. She had never chosen to play. Her quarters were far grander than anything she'd ever known. The bed was soft and adorned with silken sheets, and the windows offered a view of the kingdom that stretched far beyond what her eyes could see. Yet, all the luxury in the world couldn't drown out the feeling of isolation. Leona's heart remained heavy with the weight of her parents' decision. She was here in this palace because she had been sold. Her family had decided her future, and now she had to live with the consequences. The days passed in a blur of meals, lessons in etiquette, and quiet moments spent alone in her chambers. The Alpha King, she learned, was a man of few words. He had no interest in the court gossip or idle chatter. His sole focus was his kingdom. It was clear that his need for an heir had driven him to make decisions without a second thought. Leona was a part of that decision, but not a central one. She was a woman who couldn't bear children, and yet she was expected to serve a role that felt empty and unimportant. But as time went on, something strange began to happen. Leona noticed that the Alpha King didn't ignore her as she had first thought. He watched her, not in a cruel or dominating way, but with a kind of curiosity. The rare glances he gave her during court gatherings, his occasional words of greeting when their paths crossed, all suggested that he saw something in her, something beyond her inability to conceive an heir. One evening, As she wandered the palace gardens alone, lost in her thoughts, she saw him. The Alpha King stood by a fountain, gazing at the water. The moonlight caught his features, making him look even more imposing than usual. There was an air of quiet power about him, but in that moment, Leona saw something different in his expression. He wasn't the cold, untouchable king everyone feared. For a moment, he seemed ... human. Her heart skipped a beat as she approached him. He noticed her immediately, his sharp eyes flicking toward her, but he didn't move. Leona felt a sudden nervousness rise in her chest, but she stood her ground. "You seem deep in thought, Your Majesty," she said, her voice softer than she had intended. The Alpha King gave a small nod. "I often think when I am alone. The weight of a kingdom is not an easy one to carry." Leona didn't know how to respond to that. She knew nothing of ruling a kingdom, of making decisions that affected millions of lives, but there was something in his words, something that made her feel ... connected to him, even if only for a brief moment. "You must be tired of the palace," the Alpha King continued, his voice low. "All this grandeur, this endless court, it can feel suffocating." Leona nodded, feeling an unexpected sense of relief that he understood. "Yes, it's hard to feel at home here." There was a long silence between them, and Leona realized she had spoken more openly with him than she had with anyone in days. She felt a flicker of something. Not admiration, not love, but a curiosity about this king who seemed to carry the burden of so much alone. "I understand," he said, his gaze never leaving her. "Sometimes I wonder if I've made the right choice in everything I've done." "I know why you are here, Leona. Your parents have given you to me because of what you cannot give them. They hoped I would find use for you. But there is more to you than what they saw." Leona froze. She had never expected him to speak so openly, so honestly. He was the Alpha King, a man whose every word carried the weight of authority. And yet here he was, talking to her, as though she were something more than just a burden to be cast aside. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned his gaze toward her, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I see a woman who is not afraid to speak her mind. A woman who does not simply accept her fate. I see a fire in you, Leona. Not the fire that comes from anger, but the fire of strength, the strength to rise above the expectations of others." Leona felt her heart beat faster. His words were not what she had expected. In the court, she was nothing more than an afterthought, a woman who had failed to meet the most basic of expectations. But here, standing before the Alpha King, she was being seen for the first time. For who she truly was. "You have a choice," the Alpha King continued. "I am not the man people say I am. I do not seek a woman to simply bear my children. I need someone who can challenge me, who can stand beside me as an equal. The future of this kingdom is uncertain, and I will need a partner who is as strong as I am. If you are willing to fight for your place here, I will fight with you." Leona's breath caught in her throat. This was a choice, one that could change everything. He wasn't asking her to be a mere decoration beside him. He was offering her the chance to be something more. A partner. A ruler in her own right? But was she ready for this? Could she truly rise above the role her parents had thrust upon her? She had been sold to the Alpha King, her future chosen for her before she had a say. Now here he was, offering her a chance to take control of her destiny. To fight for a place by his side, not just as a woman of the court, but as a force in her own right. Leona stood tall, looking the Alpha King in the eye. "What would you have me do?" The king's lips curled into a small smile, the first genuine expression she had seen from him since her arrival. "Prove yourself, Leona. Prove that you are not just a pawn, that you are a queen in your own right. And I will stand with you as an equal." Her heart raced as she processed his words. This was it. Her chance to take control of her fate, to fight for what was rightfully hers. The Alpha King had given her a choice, and she would not waste it. "I will prove myself," she said, her voice steady and filled with newfound resolve. The Alpha King gave a slow nod. "Then let us begin." The days that followed Leona's conversation with the Alpha King were filled with both challenge and change. What had started as a life of isolation and resignation in the royal palace now took on a new meaning. She wasn't just the woman who had been sold to the king. She was something more, something that could no longer be ignored. Leona's resolve had sparked something inside her, something she hadn't felt before. Each day, she worked harder, studying the intricacies of court politics, learning the history of Varathia, and observing the people who shaped the kingdom. She wasn't merely surviving anymore. She was becoming part of the very fabric of the court. At first, the courtiers were skeptical. They had always seen her as a burden, a woman without purpose. But with each passing day, they saw her change. Her conversations with the king became more frequent. She questioned his decisions, offered her own ideas, and at times even disagreed with him. But instead of pushing her away, the king listened. He respected her opinions, and this was something no one had expected. One evening, during a grand banquet, the Alpha King called for her. The ballroom was alive with laughter and music, but when Leona entered, the noise faded. The nobles turned their heads, watching her every move. This was no longer the shy, withdrawn woman they had known. This was someone different, someone who commanded attention. The king, standing at the head of the room, gestured for her to join him. "Leona," he said, his voice carrying through the room, "I would like you to speak before our court. Tell them why we must change the way we govern. Tell them why Varathia deserves more than what we've been offering." Leona's heart raced, but she stood tall. She had prepared for this moment, knowing it might come. The Alpha King had always said she had to prove herself, and this was her chance. Her voice rang out through the ballroom as she spoke passionately about the need for reform, for fairness, for a future that was inclusive and strong. She didn't just talk about the king's power or legacy. She talked about the people, the farmers, the workers, the soldiers who bled for the kingdom but never had a voice at first. The nobles were silent, unsure of what to make of this bold new direction. But as Leona spoke, a change began. The court, which had once dismissed her as a mere tool in their political games, began to listen. Her words were not just words. They were the call for something better, something more powerful than any single bloodline. When she finished, the ballroom was still. Then, slowly, the applause began. The courtiers, once cold and indifferent, were now impressed. They had seen her transform from the woman who had been sold into the woman who could lead. They had seen her strength, her conviction, and her willingness to stand beside the Alpha King as an equal, not as a subject. The king looked at her with pride. "You have proven yourself, Leona," he said. "Tonight you have shown them what Varathia can become." Leona felt a surge of pride in her chest, but it wasn't just for herself. It was for the people of Varathia. They had been neglected for too long, and now they had someone who would fight for them. They had someone who would fight for her, too. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Leona worked alongside the Alpha King, formulating plans to restructure the kingdom's laws to ensure that the people had more say in their future. The king, while still ruling with authority, began to rely on her more and more. She was no longer just a woman beside him. She was a true partner in every sense of the word. As their partnership grew, so did their trust in each other. The Alpha King saw in Leona not just the strength to lead, but the wisdom to understand the complexities of governance. Leona, in turn, began to understand the weight of his position. He wasn't the cold, distant ruler she had once believed him to be. He carried the burden of an entire kingdom on his shoulders, and though he appeared invincible, he, too, needed someone who could help him bear the weight. But the challenges they faced were not over. There were still factions within the kingdom who opposed change. Noble families who clung to their power, politicians who were invested in maintaining the old ways. They saw the Alpha King's partnership with Leona as a threat. They feared the idea of a woman having a voice as powerful as a king's. One night, after a long council meeting, the Alpha King and Leona stood on the palace balcony, overlooking the city below. The night was quiet, the stars sparkling in the sky, but there was tension in the air. The kingdom was on the brink of something new. But not everyone was ready for it. "They won't stop," Leona said, her voice low. "They'll try to undermine everything we're doing. We have to be prepared." The Alpha King nodded, his eyes focused on the horizon. I know, but this is the price of change. The old ways will fight to the end. But we cannot allow fear to control us. Leona's gaze softened. You don't have to do this alone. I will stand by you. The king turned to her, his expression serious but filled with gratitude. And I will stand by you. Together, we will lead Varathia to a future that is stronger than any bloodline could ever promise. The following weeks brought turmoil. The kingdom's old guard began to move against the reforms, using their influence to sow discord. They whispered that Leona was not truly worthy of her position, that she was simply a puppet for the Alpha King. They tried to undermine her by questioning her motives, painting her as someone who cared only for her own ambition. But Leona refused to back down. She stood before the court, before the people, and spoke her truth. She was not just the Alpha King's consort. She was a ruler in her own right, and she would fight for the future of Varathia for every man, woman, and child who had been forgotten by those in power. The turning point came when a rebellion was sparked by a faction of disgruntled nobles. They tried to storm the castle, believing that by removing the Alpha King and Leona, they could restore the old order. But the people of Varathia were no longer willing to accept the past. They had tasted something new, something better. They fought for the kingdom they had always dreamed of. The battle was fierce, but it was the people who triumphed. The rebellion was crushed, and the old factions were silenced. The Alpha King and Leona stood victorious, not just because of their strength, because they had united the people under a common cause. The kingdom of Varathia had changed forever. In the aftermath of the rebellion, the Alpha King addressed his people. We have fought together for a future that is ours to shape. This kingdom belongs to all of us, not just to those who sit on thrones or hold titles. We are one. Leona stood beside him, her hand in his, a symbol of their partnership. The people cheered, and for the first time in her life, Leona felt truly at home in this kingdom. It was no longer just a place where she had been sold. It was her kingdom now, too. The Alpha King. Once a man burdened by the weight of his legacy, now stood with Leona as an equal. Together, they ruled Varathia, not by blood, but by the strength of their will, their vision, and their unwavering belief in each other.